evening, everyone. My name is Steph, and on behalf of everyone at Better Read Than Dead and Penguin Random House, thank you all for coming as we celebrate the release of Unlovable by Darren Hayes. To begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the country we are meeting on today. We recognise their continued connection to the lands and waters and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people present today. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping things. If you'd like to stick around after the talk, Darren would love to sign his book for you. And he'll be signing just at the front here. If we can get the queue going down this way, then round and out into the foyer, and then walk this way and out once you've got your book signed. However, we ask that you only get books signed as we have so many amazing fans to get through. For the same reason, you're welcome to take photos of Darren during the signing, but not a photo with him. Please ensure that flash remains off at all times, both during the talk and whilst taking photos afterwards as well. Finally, extra copies of Unlovable are available for purchase in the foyer after the talk, if you'd like to get another copy as well. Now on to the reason why we're all here. Darren Hayes is a singer, songwriter, producer, performer, and former frontman of the iconic pop duo Savage Garden. He's sold millions of albums, has toured the world, and is the superstar we all know and love. Whilst I'm sure he needs no further introduction, Darren has always been a storyteller, and tonight he is here to share his story. And joining Darren tonight is Stuart Coupe. Stuart is an Australian music journalist, author, band manager, promoter, publicist, and music label founder. His memoir, Shakes in Action, is also available for sale at the bookshop tonight. Please join me in welcoming Darren and Stuart to the stage.
Well, you all look lovely. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hi, Stuart.
Hi, Darren. How are you doing?
I'm a little nervous.
Would you like?
Yeah,
We're going to have fun.
we are going to have fun.
We're going to be talking about an intense book, but we're going to have fun talking about
I love
intense book. Thank you all for coming. Darren, this book, I wasn't sure what to expect, but it's a powerful book. It's a very intense book. There's a lot of violence in this book. And it's not what we would stereotypically call your classic showbiz memoir. I mean, was it conscious that you wanted to confront an enormous amount of things in this book?
Yeah, I would never have written a celebrity memoir because I don't consider myself a celebrity. When I was a little boy, I wanted to be a pop star. And sometimes I think of myself as a pop star, but I would never have written that kind of book. What happened was, during my last album, I felt this incredible urge and need to be really honest. Somebody said this to me recently, actually. They said they think that I kind of came out with my last album. I mean, it was called Homosexual, but in a lot of ways, I felt unbridled in my life. That title was so rebellious for me for lots of reasons we can or not talk about later. But during the promotion of that album, I did one interview for The Guardian in the UK. And there was a childhood photograph of me, and I was about 10. And they recreated that photograph of me today, and they asked me to tell the story of what was going on in the background. And I guess I had always spoken about my violent childhood, but the contents of that article were so graphic that it moved a lot of people, and it caught the attention of two publishers, one of which obviously was Penguin Australia. And I was so thrilled that Alison Urquhart contacted me and said, I really would love you to tell that story. I'm not interested in a gossipy celebrity tale. I would really love to hear that story. And I think for most of my life I'd been carrying so much pain and so many secrets, and I was ready at 51 or 52 at that point to tell that story.
And how difficult was it sitting at presumably a keyboard every day telling, revisiting some things that we'll get to, which were, very confronting, particularly the relationship between your mother and your father and your siblings.
Yeah.
That had you buried that for a long time and just not wanted to go there?
I had, yes, it was very difficult, to the point that I had to stop writing a book at one point and go back into therapy. There were things that I had forgotten about. There were things that I had witnessed as a child that were so violent and so traumatic that I'd forgotten about them. And my sister, my older sister, had a chat to me because I got really depressed writing the book at one point. And I mean, to a certain degree. But she reminded me why, because there were things that I witnessed pre-verbal, so maybe 3 years of age, that I couldn't even print. I couldn't put into the book because they're just so violent. And through therapy and through talking with my family, I was reminded of some of the things that I actually witnessed as a child that I had blocked out. So yes, it was really painful, but it was a catharsis. And like all trauma, I don't want to sound like this is an infomercial to go to therapy, but I know in my experience, I had never really processed a lot of the things that I went through. I found them so shocking that my body just froze, and I witnessed them in the same way that maybe a lot of victims of violence or SA will relate to. I witnessed them as an out-of-body experience, and I was never allowed to scream or cry or grieve. I just had to survive and protect my mother. And by the time I was about 35, those unprocessed experiences were screaming to be acknowledged because they were just triggers that were happening all throughout my life, and they were fucking up my life. Yeah.
And I mean, did you give yourself carte blanche to confront everything in this book? I mean, it doesn't seem to me like you might tell me differently, that you've left some stuff out, but you just go straight to the core of a very, very brutal relationship between, your father particularly, and lots of other things. I mean, page 18, you're sitting in a car in Los Angeles, and this is not early on, and you're seriously considering taking your own life and wondering what it's going to be like.
Right.
And that's early in the book,
I decided that I didn't want to edit anything. One of the great pieces of advice I got from Penguin and from my editor was, on my first draft, don't edit myself, which is very much the same way that I write music, actually, because if you're too self-critical, you'll never do anything. And I think with this book, because I had lived with so much shame, and not just the violence in my life, shame of being bullied as a child and a teenager for being gay, a lot of struggles with being famous and feeling like an imposter, really struggling with my sexual identity. All of those things were asking to be acknowledged and to be spoken about, so I really didn't edit anything. If anything, I just listened to some legal advice.
Would you like to read an
I
excerpt?
can, yeah. I mean,
To give everyone an
yeah, I had this joke before. I thought I would just play some of the audiobook and just, like a marionette, just move my mouth, but I will. Hilariously, I forgot my contact lenses, so I have to put on my specs. Believe me, I know they're cool. Okay, so this is actually at the very beginning of the book, so spoiler alert if you haven't read it. When I was a child, I used to think that I was psychic, and was obsessed with Star Wars. I still am. But I used to think that I had a magical power because I could tell when my father was going to hit my mother. As an adult, I realized it's just that I noticed it whenever his speech would change because he was drunk and he would slur his words. But of course, as a 5-year-old, you don't know that. And I had a way of turning everything into my life into something magical, something special, or something cinematic. And so what I'll read to you now is a night where I feel so guilty because I know my father was going to hit my mother. And I explain the emergence of this thing inside my stomach that I call the shame monster because I'm a little boy and I think that there is this creature that lives inside me. What I don't realize is this is the beginning of anxiety. But for me as a child, I imagine it's this creature that lives inside me and it stabs me and it hurts me if I don't listen to it. I'm lying awake in my bedroom, already feeling guilty. I've done nothing to protect my mother from what's about to happen. I look up at the walls, stained with scuff marks and yellow tinge. Years of my parents smoking have turned the once white paint to a kind of caramel. I never want friends to come over. The whole house looks like a version of this bedroom, neglected and sad. I'm so embarrassed by it. I put up some posters in my corner of the room next to the window, which is next to the alley. There's Wonder Woman that I got from TV Week, a picture of Mork and Mindy that I pulled from the Sunday newspaper, and some stickers that I've been collecting from cartons of Sunny Queen eggs my mother buys. I've plastered them all over the walls, on my bedhead, and on the back of the door. On Peter's side of the room, it's my brother, 4 faces of the members of the rock band Kiss look down upon me with sympathy. I wish they could help. I hear my father's voice and it has an edge to it. I look out through the crack in the door. I can see into the hallway from my bed, which I must specify is a child's bed. It might have a cool new 1970s bedspread, but I'm not stupid. It's not a big boy bed. I can't remember when we bought it. That's how old it is. I think it used to be a bunk bed, stacked on top of my brother's, but now they sit side by side. It's another reason I don't want anyone inside my bedroom. I'm not a child. There's movement through the sliver of light in the crack in the door. I can't make out exactly what's being said, but I hear the tone of my mother's voice and she's frightened. For a moment, I wish what is happening was a musical. That the 2 people arguing outside are dancers in a music video like the kind they play on Saturday morning TV. I imagine that instead of my father being truly dangerous, he's just pretending like those dancers in an Elvis movie when they fight. I pretend what is happening outside my bedroom is an elaborate dance sequence on a Friday night variety show. I look up at my posters and project myself onto them or them onto me. And soon the bedroom windows will open and a troupe of dancers will climb in from the alley and fog will roll in across the floor. And I let my mind wander. It has to. If I leave this bedroom, I'm going to get a spanking. But the thought of my mother being in danger is too painful to think about. So I think about something else. A musical sequence involving the two of them. I've watched enough Sunday afternoon musicals to take all the information I'm receiving and rearrange it into something not just different from the truth, but comforting and familiar. Instead of the sound of a hand slapping a face, it's a percussive instrument. In place of the flash of my mother's dress rushing past my partially closed door, it's a burst of colour from a rainbow-patterned umbrella, one of the many opening on the Lido deck of the Pacific Princess, the luxury ocean liner from the Love Boat. There's a cast of hundreds, all in formation, twirling their umbrellas towards the camera as they pan off the screen alternately, left and right, each one smiling at me before they disappear. They're about to reveal something. The conga line eventually ends with my beautiful mother elegantly reclined on the brown and yellow banana lounge that she so often sits on outside, tanning herself. But not today. Today, there's a sparkling blue sky with glitter raining down behind her, while artificial waves made of translucent blue fiberglass spin in a gloriously fake ocean below the boat deck, turned by stagehands just off camera. Her dress is moving, tickled by a fan off stage which gently caresses her blonde hair against her forehead. The camera lens has a star glow filter on it, which makes her look shimmering, and her blue eyeshadows sparkle as she winks at me, confidently sipping one of those cold, frozen adult drinks with an umbrella, the same colour of her mango summer dress. She looks up to my father, who enters, arm outstretched, to slow dance with her. Then I hear a sound, and the illusion is shattered. It's the worst sound in the world. My mother crying, pleading, screaming his name, begging for him to stop hitting her. Robert, you're hurting me. I immediately jump out of bed. I look over at Peter, but he's still asleep. I wish I was able to get out of bed when my parents told me, but I've never been able to relax until my mother's asleep. I think about shaking Peter awake, but he looks so peaceful. I decide to venture out on my own. I know I'll see my big sister Tracy in the hallway. The sudden change of light from darkness of my bedroom to the brightly lit kitchen makes me squint, but I see everything I fear close enough. My father has gripped her by the hair with one huge fist. His sunburned biceps flex in a show of dominance. My mother is horrified that I'm witnessing this. My father's indifferent, defiant even. Go to bed, he says firmly. I look at my sister. She's hidden from his view in the hallway. She gives me the shh signal. I can't, I say, disobeying my father. And then my sister appears with a hockey stick.
Phew. And hearing you read that, I mean, I was struck again that part of this book is, or a lot of this book, the subtext is, it's a love letter to your mother too, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, my mother met my father when she was 15 here in Sydney. I think at a dance in Hornsby. I don't even know where that is. Do you know where that is? Yeah? But I was always told he was very cool because he was a drummer. He's a bit of a bad boy. But he was violent very early on. And he beat her up on their wedding night. Yeah. And she came from the most loving family. But my mother's DNA was that she carries, and I carry, this tendency toward major depressive disorder. Her sister died way too young, and her mother committed suicide when she was also very young. And she was, I guess, the perfect victim. You know, she didn't really have anywhere to go. He was a police officer, and when she went to the police, they all stuck up for him. And so there were no laws that protected women back then. And so yes, she is a woman who had suffered extreme tragedies in her life. And she was absolutely stuck with him. She was stuck with him.
Because throughout the book, there's a reconciliation. He promises that he's going to stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be less aggressive.
Yes.
And as a family, you come back,
Mm-hmm.
and then you leave. I mean, what do you think, takes people back to circumstances that, is it a blind belief that it's going to be better next time?
That's such a great question, Stuart, because I had so much, as a child, when we left my father, it was the happiest 6 months of my life. We lived in a caravan park, and I apparently peed the bed every night for 6 months. I had intense nightmares. I don't remember it, but my waking life was so happy because we were away from him.
Mm-hmm.
What I didn't realise was that my mother was dead broke. She was working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. We were basically in hiding from him for a little while. And you think that you go back to your abuser because maybe it's a toxic relationship or maybe it's a financial situation. But actually, the first contact, this is a statistic with violence, and it's shocking to me that the tales that I tell in this book are still so relevant to women in Australia today. But a woman's life is at the most risk when she first leaves a man.
Wow. Yeah.
That's what it is. And my mother's life was in danger because he discovered us.
He was furious. I mean, the truck, that you
Yes.
portray that amazingly.
He was furious.
Your Uncle Colin takes you away.
My favourite sibling, my favourite cousins, my mother's favourite, not that she has favourites, but she did. My beautiful Auntie Jenny, who, she taught me how to draw Wonder Woman, boots and all sorts of stuff. She was amazing. I just loved her so much. And she and my Uncle Colin helped us move into a trailer park. But when my father found out, he abducted my mother. He beat my uncle up, and I didn't see them for 10 years. He chased them out of our lives, and they were petrified. And as a child, I thought that they didn't love me, and I never realised that he stalked them, he threatened their lives, and
you didn't see them for over a decade. It was a long time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And getting back, you're continuing on that time. I mean, you get the Star Wars figurines because you're obsessed by Star Wars, right?
Yes.
Still?
Always, yeah.
All right.
Do you want to know why?
Of course.
Okay, so Stuart's referring to the fact that when we lived in a trailer park, Star Wars toys were very expensive. And I still believed in Santa Claus for way too old. Does anyone? I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But I remember when I found out that possibly Santa wasn't true, I was devastated. And I remember my mother turning around and going, "Oh, for God's sakes, you already knew that." And I was like, "I didn't." And she was like, "Oh, sweetheart, it's Mummy." I was like, "Oh." But anyway, maybe a year before that, living in a trailer park, she bought one of those little dolls every week. And it was really expensive.
Mm.
Yeah. And what kills me is that she lets Santa take fucking credit for it. which is crazy. But that's how much she protected my innocence, you know. Yeah.
But one of the really moving portions, early on in the book is you have these figurines and you look out the window and you see your father's pickup truck.
Yes.
He's found you. And so you've got this dichotomy between this life that you're having with your mum and you've got the Star Wars figurines.
Yeah.
Santa still exists. And there's the pickup truck out the back. And there's that awful sense that things are again going to change.
Yeah, in that moment, it was so hard writing that. There are two, I really believe in echoes in life. And in my life, there are lots of them, but later on in my life, I have to go to a trailer park and find my father to tell him that my nephew has died by suicide. But Stuart is referring to the moment when I'm a child, and we were, for all intents and purposes, sort of in a witness protection program. And I was playing with my toys and I looked up and my father found us, and my whole world just it was like a sand castle just disintegrating, because I knew there was no way he was going to let us go. Yeah, it was devastating. And yeah, like you mentioned before, we did go back to him. She had to go back to him. She was terrified of his vengeance.
And there's another brief section in the book when it's almost like to me, your father was trying to transfer his violence onto you because you forget to water or feed the birds.
Right.
And a couple of them pass away.
Yeah. And
he tells you that you're a murderer. And that's a pretty confronting thing for anyone to be told. But it seems like he's trying to almost push it back. You're like, you're a bad person like me.
So let me clarify a couple of things about abuse. So for me, what I learned about abuse was that it exists because victims feel so ashamed that they hide the evidence, and the abuser is always seen as, my dad in the local community was just seen as good old Bob, because we were so ashamed of what happened to us. We hid everything. I knew how to plaster up walls. I knew what Sally's products existed. We knew how to do that. We knew how to fix holes in walls and replace bits of furniture that were broken. And, it wasn't until a therapist sat down and said to me, you do realise that even what I thought were just normal 70s spankings, I realised, oh shit, he used to beat me up. He used to use his fists, and my middle brother Peter, he would get drunk and put his fists up and want to have bar fights with him, and he would beat him up. And the spankings that I got were so bad that we had to have stories about them while I healed. And I just thought that was normal, that a bruise would take 2 weeks to heal. I thought that was normal. And that normalization of that happens under the cover of shame. And that's how an abuser gets away with what they do, is because you feel you deserved what happened to you, or you feel it's normal, and you feel like if you ever told anybody what is happening to you, you would just be looked down upon in some way. And so it's so emancipating, I think, to be able to talk about this stuff and realise that I'm not afraid of him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And following on from that, there's a point where you conjure up where you are untouchable, and you say, that's what I've suddenly become, and because you were being bullied by Elijah, if I remember correctly.
That's the pseudonym I gave him. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you end up having a violent confrontation with him, where you say, you became the monster to defeat the monster.
Yeah.
And that must have been very confronting for you to have come from a family of violence to find yourself being violent.
Yes. And it's so hard, I think, to, I'm not a Christian, but I've always loved the idea of turning the other cheek, and I turned a lot of other cheeks at school. I was beaten up a lot, and there's a chapter in the book called Vibrator, because that was my nickname at school for maybe 3 years. It was so degrading and so humiliating, and there were times when I just didn't want to go to school. The violence, the degradation, the homophobia was so extreme. So I just graduated from, a full term of my father's rage and alcoholism, which lasted maybe until I was 12 or 13. And then I went to high school and I was just fresh meat. I was told I was gay and lots of homophobic slurs that I just didn't understand. I was just a dreamer, It took me so long to work out that I was gay, but I would take these beatings because I was such a pacifist, and I still am a pacifist. Like, I'm anti-war, I'm anti-death penalty, like that's who I am. But at a certain point, you do punch back. And the feeling that you get when you punch back and it works is very scarily intoxicating, because I realized I wasn't small. I was a big child and my bully was tiny. And it's terrifying what I could have done to him. I remember it was this state of dissociative rage, and it scares me what I could have done to him, but something in me stopped me, that I walked away and absolutely felt, wow, I'm no better than you. I've just become you, and therefore my father. Yeah.
But he did join the police force and you didn't.
My father?
No, Elijah. Did he become a police?
No, he didn't.
Oh, didn't he? He stopped you for an autograph.
No, he did. What he became was a mega fan.
Ah, and that's right.
What he became was someone who stopped me on the way to the Brisbane Entertainment Centre.
Ah, that's good. Right.
And I thought he was a cop.
You thought he was, that's right. Yes.
And he was like, "It's me!" Hi. And I was just so baffled. And he was like, "Would you sign my CD?" I just couldn't believe this is my high school bully. And then there I am at the Brisbane Entertainment Centre, and he's in the front row screaming out, "I love you." So that's how that ended.
Let's talk a little bit about music for a minute. I mean, part of your sense of self and being untouchable, we can thank Michael Jackson.
Yes. I was so lost and looking for a role model when the bullying at school was extreme. And I mean this in a really lovely way. I did get attention from girls, and I didn't really understand what it meant. My brother would take me to our local mall, and he would kind of use me as like bait for girls. But he never let me know that I never felt good looking. I always felt chubby, not good looking. He was an Adonis. My brother was just this blonde, athletic, just gorgeous, just perfect. He could have been on Neighbours. He could have been, actually I was going to say Craig McLaughlin, but maybe I shouldn't. But anyway, but we would walk around and girls would come up and I'd just be like, they would talk to me and I'd be like, what does she want? You know, like I thought I was so used to being bullied, didn't understand it. Where were we going with this question, Stuart?
I think I was trying to lead you into the role that Michael Jackson played.
Right. So here's the deal. So being called gay, not really understanding that, and just not understanding, who I was in my own skin, and feeling somewhat androgynous, I think, was a very safe place to exist. And post-Thriller, Mike comes back with his bad image, and most of the world hated it, and I loved it. He was just so exotic to me. I loved that he was wearing makeup, and he was my David Bowie. There was a sadness behind his eyes. This is the wonderful thing about having a career in this business. You know, I grew up and I never got to meet Michael Jackson. He sadly passed before I was due to meet him, but I met his nephews and got to go to his family's home in the valley and see the studio where he wrote Thriller and all that sort of stuff. Wild, amazing, crazy life that I've had. But I went to see him in concert, and even though the entire time he was on stage, there were two girls behind me. I'm going to swear. I'm going to use a slur. But there were two girls behind me that were kicking me and calling me a faggot the whole show. Because I was yelling out, I love you, Michael. I love you, Michael. And I just remember seeing him on stage and thinking, I'm going to become that one day. And I don't mean a superstar or whatever, but I just meant I'm going to become this magician that gets to kind of play around with the molecules in the room and this ebb and flow, this energy. He was a magician and I was a student, and 10 years later we sold out 2 nights at the entertainment centre of Savage Garden. I made that decision in that moment. It was a survival decision.
And also Prince loomed large. Prince and George Michael, I think, come.
Prince, Prince is the reason my last album had, written, recorded, produced, mixed, whatever, and George, on George's Faith record.
Mm-hmm.
It was always a goal of mine to get to that point where I could do everything myself. It took me 25 years longer than it did for Prince and George Michael, but again, I think it was that androgyny that both, had this indefinable sexuality, which today is very normal, but back in 1987, that was incredibly radical. Yeah.
And getting you to that point where you becoming, a pop star. I mean, how important was that little ad? I'm guessing it was about that big in Time Off.
It was actually this big.
Oh, it was bigger?
Yeah, a little bit bigger.
Oh, right.
What do you
So
think?
it was an ad looking for a singer, and you responded.
I did, and I always credit my ex-wife Colby for that, because I was a little shit at university. I was at university because my father told me I would never make it, and he threatened to kick me out of home, and I had to do a teaching degree, and I was so miserable. And a fellow student just said, "If you're so miserable, why are you here?" And I was like, "Oh, well, it's really hard to sing." And she said, "Well, have you ever tried?" And that night, Colby brought home Time Off, Street Mag, and she said, "Just look in the want ads." And Daniel had posted an ad, and I answered it.
Mm. Yeah. And before that, I mean, I thought it was quite astonishing. Chloe was your friend, and you both went for a role at acting school.
Yeah.
And you got in.
Yeah.
And she didn't.
I got into everything.
Yeah. And she didn't get into it.
Not a thing.
Not a thing.
Nope.
Oh. But you.
Everything.
You said, "I'm not going to do this."
Yeah.
Because
I'm an idiot. Yeah.
I wasn't going there, but
Fatal flaw. I had a girlfriend in high school, and I thought we were going to get married, and we were going to become famous together. And I look back now, and everyone could see from space that I was this theatrical kid, and I was supposed to do this. And my dearest friends at school auditioned for what was then called the Bachelor of Drama at Kelvin Grove QUT, and within that degree was an acting course, and they took 15 people nationally. They didn't get in. They got into the teaching degree, and I was so disappointed that I didn't do it, and I ended up studying journalism. No offense. And was miserable at that too. I was doing literary criticism, and you can imagine the book list, and they gave me style, the style guide, and I was just like, I love adjectives, I don't want to do this. And so I re-auditioned, and I got a place in every program and the acting program, and she didn't get into anything, and I said, I feel so bad because it's our dream, we're going to be actors and famous together. I should give this up for you. And she went, okay.
and then to make things worse, she dumped you.
Dumped me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big time.
Big time. This is kind of dumping where we had tickets to see Prince together.
Yes.
And I had to sit next to her. Very devastating.
So let's go slightly forward to the rehearsal, and you've got to perform live. You've got to do to become part of this group. You've got to do a live performance as well.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to the rehearsal, and there were 4 people there, and
yeah, Daniel, his brother Oliver, and I must say, Oliver, an incredibly talented guitarist, songwriter, and Daniel really were the band. And then they had 2 other members, Jamie and Scott. Jamie played bass, Scott was on drums, and that was my audition. And I almost didn't go. I talked myself out of the audition. I was like, you don't know any of the references I know. Who didn't know who Janet Jackson was? And I was like, what? And I was into what is now, music that the gays listen to, I guess. And Daniel liked Tina Arena and Jimmy Barnes, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I'd grown up on soul music, dance music, electronic music, pop stars, whatever, and I was thinking, this ain't gonna work. That made him want me more. So he's like, no, you have to come, audition. So I auditioned, and it was a complete disaster. They were very unfriendly. Daniel wasn't. Daniel was very... He reminded me of Simon Cowell. He could see this diamond in the rough, and I give him that kudos, that he could see that I had this potential, and he could hear something in my voice that they didn't. So while they were all like, he was just like, no, this guy, yeah.
But I was fascinated, Darren, that there's a portion in the book where after that audition you go off to the nearest food court.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually say, quote, I have a feeling one day I'm not going to be able to come here without being recognised.
Yeah.
That's very prescient, thinking, what was going through your head at that time?
Well, that I had made this pact with the universe at 15, that I would be famous, not because I'm arrogant, but because it was the only way that I could survive. And I don't know, it felt like destiny. There are moments in my life that have felt like I am absolutely walking in this carved out track that is my destiny. It's almost like, and I fall into it and I feel it. It's like a tingle. And I knew, I left there and I knew my entire life was going to change, and it was an ominous feeling. It wasn't an exciting feeling. I knew.
And you were scared?
Yes, I was.
Right.
because I knew that I was about to experience a cautionary tale. I was about to get exactly what I wanted.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you become, a star and you become famous, I mean, you, as comes through very much in the book, you don't cope very well with it. You plummet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if anything, you're taken back down to where you were as the young boy.
Internal, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, externally,
Yeah, you were fine.
I need more and more and more of the escapism. So thank God for the fans and the audience, because I am a fan, still am. It's so sacred to me, that experience of having a musician just see you. I've had that happen to me in my life. It happened with Stevie Nicks when I was younger, and it happened at that Michael Jackson concert when an artist looks you in the eye. And yeah, we do see you. So if you think, when you go to a concert, you think, I think they looked at me, and totally. Like, it's a soul exchange. And it's very moving. And I live for that, right? So I was existing purely on that, the connection with the audience. I knew that there was something deeply sad in Michael Jackson's eyes when I saw him. And then I knew at the ascent of our success, or fame, if you want to call it that, I had this sadness about me, and there were fans that tried to protect me, even if they didn't realize it. Lots of them are here tonight.
And they saw those eyes?
I think so.
Yes.
I mean, I'd have to ask you, but there was a sense of maternal connection and maybe a shared trauma bonding. I don't know, but I definitely didn't feel good enough. I felt very, my self-esteem was very low, and so I turned up the spectacle. And I cared so deeply about the fan experience, the magic, the if I meet you, I want to make your day. I want you to remember how I smelled, what my perfume was like, how I made you feel, all that stuff. I was living only for that because my internal world was just disintegrating. Juxtapose that with Daniel, where pretty much from the minute we began, he really was just like, I hate this. Really don't want to do this. I was the opposite. I loved doing it. I hated life, loved the job, if that made sense.
So what was it like for you when there were no fans there? It was an off day. It was just kind of, you had that time to reflect. You're a superstar. You're recognised everywhere, but you're by yourself. What was that like?
I want you to imagine you've just achieved everything you ever wanted to achieve on your first attempt. We've just won more arias than anyone's ever won in the history of the award show. And we've sold millions of records around the world. We've had a #1 in the United States. I'm now a multi-millionaire. I've paid off all my family's mortgages, can buy a house with cash, all that stuff. And I'm sitting alone in an apartment in New York City watching episodes of Where Are They Now? And just thinking, oh, is that me? Is that what my life will be? That was before affirmation was even released. Yeah, it was terrifying.
Yeah. And at the very beginning, Daniel said, he was not someone you could lean on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you say that you were told early on and maybe you didn't see exactly what was coming.
Yes, I've become better at it. I think part of... so let me just set Daniel aside for a second and let me just address my own responsibility for this, which is that because I was traumatized, because I had a childhood of abuse, because I was constantly in threat detection. From as young as I can remember, I was always waiting for something bad to happen. And how that can show up in your behaviour is that you have a very bad judge of character. You just trust everybody. You have to. I had to trust strangers. Sometimes we would be at the pub on a Sunday night and I would just tug a stranger's skirt and they would take care of me. You know, that survival skill turned into a people-pleasing personality. So when I met Daniel, I just thought, oh my God, we're going to be like brothers. We're going to be best friends. We are going to be like one on the edge. No. Oh, we're not? This is just business. This is just business. Oh. And that happened during the recording process for the first record. And it was tough to go through this extraordinary privilege and the success that we had with somebody who, for whatever reason, just was not able to share that experience with me. So I forged those relationships with other people, with publicists, with band members, with other people around me. He was an island, and his goal was to get a record deal and become successful. And once he got it, he was done.
And getting that record deal, just interested, what does it feel like to get 150 rejections?
I never felt rejected.
Oh, really?
No, again, it goes...
Despite people... No, the self-belief?
Yeah, and, you know, I think this is very common with anyone who makes it in an industry that is extremely competitive and the odds are very, very low. You have to be self-delusional. And I was just like... I mean, look, Stuart, even before we tried to get a record deal, I would, drive around in Kingswood, and I'd just like crouch down in the back. I'm like, oh my God, people are going to recognize me. So I would be 12, and what I was really doing was hiding from school bullies. But I would take that experience and be like, oh my God, what if it's the paparazzi? And so those 150 rejection letters were just like, well, they're wrong. They're wrong. I had a screaming argument with John Woodruff, who signed us, when he told us that I wasn't going to attend the mix of our first album. And he was like, what made you think you were going to attend the mix of the album? I was like, because Madonna does. But that's how I saw myself. It's just, I don't know. So it's a strange thing. It's a really cheesy analogy, but I love the fact that, the way a diamond is created is through millions and millions of years of intense pressure, right? And I would never recommend the life that I had or the childhood that I had, but I do think that there were so few options for joy or happiness for me that one dream saved my life, kept me alive. It had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It was pathological. It had to happen. Otherwise, I would have crumpled up and just become this small, tiny thing. And I just wasn't meant to be that.
Mm-hmm.
No.
And eventually you did write about your mother in 2 Beds and a Coffee Machine. Was that a difficult song to write?
Yeah, it came so quickly. I love this part of my history with Daniel because You know, for that album, for Affirmation, we were writing separately. We weren't even on the same continent when we were writing a lot of that record. And but the piano ballads were just so good. Happened because we were forced to be in the same room together. And that was almost like automatic writing. Like subconscious thoughts just leaking out where he started to play that beautiful riff on the piano. And I had a lump in my throat and I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and I'd never shared that story with him. And I had to ask my mother permission, and she said yes at first. And then 2 weeks later, she called me up, and she said, "I've changed my mind, and I can't let you put that record out." And it's the only time I've ever said no to my mum, because we'd spent about $100,000 on the orchestra on the song. But we had to have a sort of a come to Jesus moment where I said, "Mum, I really think if I don't tell anyone it's about me, that people will hear the song and it will help them." And she said, "Okay." So at the time, no one really knew. People would come up to me and say, "That song is so sad, who is it about?" And I used to lie about it.
You wouldn't say?
No, out of respect for her.
And before we finish up, and I think you're going to perform a couple of songs.
Yes, yeah.
I also wanted to go to your, I guess your character. I mean, you had all this money, and I mean, you supported your father. You went back to, until the final, you were paying bills, and you were, he became this Livy's dad, because you were a star.
He was the father of Savage Garden.
Yes, yeah.
He loved it.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's the reason I loved Star Wars. I didn't finish that question, so I'll end with this question. It's actually kind of naive and sad, but beautiful. It's a story about a boy whose father is a monster. But in Star Wars, his father is a monster, and he wears a mask. And in Star Wars, the boy's father eventually takes the mask off. And he says, "I love you, son." And I always hoped that my father would take the mask off for me. And I just got wise to the fact that life is in the movie. And he's not a fictional character. My father is responsible for everything that he's done to all of us. And I had to accept that he's never going to change, and he was never going to love me the way that I hoped that he would love me. And I had to set that burden down. Yeah.
Thank you for writing such a magnificent book.
Thank you for talking to me.
Now, Darren is going to perform some songs.